The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold edges. The handwriting was elegant and unfamiliar to Aisha, but the family crest at the top corner made her heart skip. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned it over. Her mother's family people who had cut ties with her years ago had sent her something. She hesitated before opening it. The last time she had seen any of them was at her father's funeral, where whispers about bad business choices and falling from grace floated behind her back. They had offered no comfort, no support, only pity, masked as politeness. Since then, she'd learned to live without them, but curiosity got the better of her. She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the thick paper inside. It was an invitation to the Malik family gala, celebrating the 50th wedding anniversary of her uncle and aunt, the same uncle who had taken over her late father's company after his death. The wording was lavish and formal. "We cordially invite Ms. Aisha Malik to the Malik family celebration, an evening of family, success and gratitude." Aisha let out a small, humorless laugh. "Gratitude," she whispered. They hadn't shown any gratitude when her father's share of the company had been quietly taken from her mother after he passed. But the bitterness in her chest softened as she thought of her father's old words. "Never let pride make you smaller than you are. Aisha, even kindness shown to those who hurt you is your strength, not your weakness." For the rest of the day, she stared at the invitation sitting on her small wooden table. Her apartment was modesta, one-bedroom on the edge of the city, filled with second-hand furniture and sunlight filtering through thin curtains. She had built a quiet, simple life after her parents' deaths, working hard at a small firm she started on her own. She didn't have luxury, but she had peace. Still, something about the invitation gnawed at her. Why now? Why after all these years of silence? Her best friend, Sarah, noticed the change in her expression when she dropped by that evening. "Why do you look like someone offered you free poison?" Sarah teased, plopping onto the couch. Aisha handed her the invitation wordlessly. Sarah read it and frowned. "You're not seriously thinking of going, are you?" Aisha shrugged. "I don't know. It feels strange. But maybe I should. For closure." Sarah crossed her arms. "Closure? Or are you hoping they'll finally see what they lost?" Aisha didn't answer. She didn't want revenge. She told herself that much. But she couldn't deny a quiet wish to walk in with her head held high, to prove to them that she had survived without their wealth or their pity. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories surfacing like ghosts. The last conversation with her uncle replayed in her mind his cold tone when he told her mother, "Business is business. Sentiment doesn't keep companies alive." Her father's innovations had been the backbone of the family enterprise, yet once he was gone, they'd erased his name from the company's history as though he'd never existed. Aisha turned onto her side and exhaled slowly. Maybe it was time. Time to walk into their world again, not as the poor orphan they pitied, but as someone who had built something of her own. Even if it was small dot in the morning, she picked up the invitation again. The golden letters gleamed under the soft light. With a steady hand, she circled the RSVP line and wrote one word in blue ink. The night of the celebration arrived faster than Aisha expected. By late afternoon, the sky was painted in streaks of orange and rose, fading into twilight. She stood before the small mirror in her apartment, inspecting herself one last time. Her outfit was simple, a long, cream-colored dress she'd owned for years, pressed, mended at the hem, and clean. She added a thin shawl embroidered by her mother long ago, its faded gold thread catching the light just enough to make it special. No jewelry, no designer clutch, just a small purse and the quiet grace she had always carried. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. She imagined the laughter, the polished cars, the scent of expensive perfumes. She thought of Sana, her cousin always dressed in the latest brands, who used to sneer, "You'll never fit in with us. Aisha, you're too ordinary." Aisha almost turned back, but then she caught sight of her reflection again, tired eyes. Calm smile, a woman who had rebuilt her life from ashes. she whispered softly. "You've faced worse than a few cruel tongues." With that, she picked up her bag and stepped outside. The Malik family mansion stood like a palace at the edge of the city, its gates lined with flowers, lights twinkling from every corner. Cars filled the long driveway, and the soft hum of classical music floated through the air. Aisha arrived by taxi. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror as the mansion came into view. "Big event, miss?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Something like that." As she stepped out, a valet in a sharp black uniform hurried toward her, momentarily hesitating when he saw her modest dress. His eyes flickered, polite but puzzled. He took her invitation, scanned it, and nodded. "Welcome, Miss Malik." A few guests nearby turned to look. Some smiled politely. Others, less discreetly, whispered behind manicured hands. Aisha heard fragments of their remarks. "Who is she? Did she really come in a taxi?" But she kept walking. Inside, the hall was breathtaking. Golden chandeliers hung like crowns, and the marble floor gleamed beneath her feet. Waiters floated between guests, carrying trays of glimmering glasses. Laughter filled the air, carefree, practiced, elegant. Aisha took a quiet seat near the back. She didn't want to draw attention, but her entrance had already caused ripples. From across the room, she caught sight of Sana, radiant in a sequined gown. Her laughter was sharp and deliberate as she leaned toward a group of cousins. Within seconds, Aisha knew they were talking about her. Sana approached, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. "Aisha? Oh my, I almost didn't recognize you." Her tone dripped with mock sweetness. "You look nostalgic? Is that the same shawl you used to wear years ago?" "Yes," Aisha replied calmly. "It belonged to my mother." Sana smirked. "How touching." Her eyes traveled from Aisha's worn shoes to her plain purse. "You're brave for coming dressed like that. Most people wouldn't risk being mistaken for the staff." A few others laughed quietly. Aisha felt her chest tighten, but she smiled, a soft, disarming smile. "It's not the dress that matters," she said gently. "It's the reason we're here, isn't it?" Sana blinked, momentarily thrown off before recovering her mocking grin. "Of course. Enjoy the party." "Cousin." As she walked away, Aisha exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay still. The humiliation stung, but beneath it was something steadier, resolve. She turned her gaze toward the main table at the front of the hall. Her uncle, the patriarch, sat in a grand chair surrounded by relatives. His laughter was booming, his presence commanding. For a moment their eyes met. His smile faded briefly, replaced by a flicker of recognition and perhaps guilt. Then he looked away. Aisha sat back, clutching her mother's shawl a little tighter. The night was only beginning, and she had no idea that soon the laughter aimed at her would turn into stunned silence. But for now, she endured their mockery with quiet grace, knowing something they didn't, something that would change the course of the evening forever. Dinner had not yet begun, but the hall buzzed with chatter and laughter. The sound of clinking glasses mixed with the low hum of classical music. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a perfect family celebration, warm, elegant, full of joy. But to Aisha, it felt like stepping into a cage of glittering wolves. She sat quietly at her table near the edge of the hall, observing the guests as they mingled. Every few minutes, she caught someone glancing in her direction, sometimes curious, sometimes mocking. She told herself it didn't matter. She had come here for a reason, though even she couldn't quite name it yet, but the whispers grew louder. Who invited her? A woman said behind a jeweled fan. "I thought the guest list was for family only," another replied. "She is family," someone corrected. "Barely." The poor cousin. The words stung, each one landing like a cold raindrop on her heart. She took a slow sip of water, willing her hands not to shake. Suddenly, laughter erupted near the buffet table. A group of young cousins, Sana among them, were staring at her again. Sana leaned over, stage whispering loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Maybe she's here for the free food." You know how some people love charity dinners? The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, and deliberate. A waiter passing by froze, glancing at Aisha sympathetically before hurrying off. The humiliation burned through her, hot and heavy. She wanted to stand up, to defend herself, but years of being looked down on had taught her something valuable. Silence could be louder than words. Still, her heart ached. She thought of her parents, how her father used to attend these same family events in his crisp suits, always with her mother at his side. They had once been respected, admired even. Now their daughter was treated as an intruder in the same halls that once echoed with her father's laughter. Aisha's uncle, Mr. Rashid Malik, noticed the commotion. His eyes briefly met hers, then slid away. He made no move to stop the mockery. In fact, he looked almost satisfied, as if her presence was an inconvenience he had predicted. "Excuse me," came a soft voice beside her. It was an older maid, her hair streaked with gray. "Miss, would you like me to bring you something to eat?" "The line's a bit crowded." Aisha smiled gratefully. "Thank you. That's kind of you." The maid nodded. "Not everyone here remembers kindness, miss." "But I do. You look just like your mother." For a moment, the words broke through the heaviness in Aisha's chest. "You knew her?" The woman smiled faintly. "Worked for your family long ago. Your mother was a good soul." Then, with a respectful nod, she disappeared back into the crowd. Aisha blinked back tears. The cruelty around her blurred for a moment. She straightened her posture, brushing her fingers over her shawl as if it were armor. Moments later, Sana returned, this time holding a glass of champagne. She leaned over Aisha's table with a mock pout. "You know, Aisha, if you needed a better outfit, you could have asked me. I'd have lent you something. It's such a shame. This is a celebration, not a charity event." Several nearby guests snickered. Aisha looked up at her cousin, meeting her gaze with calm eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Sana, but I don't need anyone's charity. I came to celebrate your parents' anniversary, nothing more." Sana rolled her eyes and turned to the others. "Hear that? So noble." Then louder she added, "Well, make sure you eat plenty. No one should leave hungry tonight, right?" The laughter returned, crueler this time. Aisha took a deep breath and smiled faintly, refusing to let them see her break. Inside, though, she felt a shift, a quiet spark of strength rising through the humiliation. She wasn't here to beg for acceptance. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. Not yet. But soon, they would know exactly who she had become and why this night would be remembered not for their mockery, but for her revelation. And when that moment came, every laugh at her expense would turn to stunned silence. As Aisha sat at the corner table, the laughter around her began to fade into a dull hum. The golden lights of the banquet blurred slightly as her mind drifted away back to a different time. A different house, a different version of her family. She remembered being 8 years old, running through the wide marble hallways of the same mansion, her father's laughter echoing behind her. Back then, her father, Kamal Malik, was the pride of the family, brilliant, generous, and endlessly kind. He was the youngest of the Malik brothers, the one who dreamed big and built the family business into something respected. But dreams have a price. Aisha remembered how he used to stay up late, papers scattered across his study, her mother bringing him tea while he sketched out business plans. "One day," he used to tell Aisha, "you'll see this company touch lives. Not just ours, but people who need hope." Yet the same vision that made him special also made him a target. His older brother, Rashid Malik, didn't like being overshadowed. Rashid was practical, shrewd, and obsessed with control. Where Kamal saw opportunity, Rashid saw risk. Where Kamal saw people, Rashid saw profit margins. It started with small disagreements, then arguments, then betrayal. Aisha remembered the night her father came home late, face pale and eyes distant. Her mother had rushed to him, asking what happened. He just said quietly, "It's over." Rashid and the board had voted him out, forced him to sell his shares after accusing him of financial mismanagement. Lies, cleverly spun by people he once trusted. By the end of that month, the company her father had built from the ground up no longer bore his name. Aisha was too young to understand. But she remembered the silence that followed, the way her parents stopped attending family dinners, how invitations ceased, and how the Malik name suddenly carried shame when attached to hers. her mother tried to keep her spirits high. "We have what matters," she used to say, brushing Aisha's hair each morning. "We have honesty, and we have each other." But honesty couldn't pay the bills. Within 2 years, her father's health declined. The stress of losing everything, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, it all took its toll. A heart attack struck him one winter morning, and by the time Aisha reached the hospital, he was gone. She was 15. At the funeral, Rashid stood at the podium, giving a polished speech about forgiveness and family unity. He never mentioned how he had stolen the business or how he refused to give Aisha's mother her husband's rightful share. After that, even the smallest gestures from the family stopped. When Aisha's mother grew ill, they didn't visit. When she passed away years later, not a single Malik relative attended the funeral. That was the day. Aisha made a silent vow she would never beg them for anything, not for money, not for pity, not for belonging. If she ever walked among them again, it would be on her own terms, and she kept that promise. After her mother's death, Aisha worked wherever she could, tutoring children, managing small accounts, saving every rupee. She studied business at night, her father's old notebooks her only teachers. She built a small consultancy firm with nothing but determination and sleepless nights. Slowly, she earned clients who valued honesty, the same trait her father was punished for years later. When she learned that the Malik Corporation was drowning in debt due to Rashid's greed, she didn't laugh. She saw an opportunity of poetic symmetry. Through an anonymous investment group, she bought their failing shares. Piece by piece, she reclaimed what was stolen, and now, sitting in their grand hall under glittering chandeliers, surrounded by people who still thought she was beneath them, Aisha smiled faintly. They had no idea that the poor cousin they mocked now held the strings to everything they celebrated. The humiliation she endured tonight was nothing compared to the lesson they were about to learn. Dinner was finally served. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware shimmered, and the air filled with the aroma of expensive food and self-satisfaction. Aisha sat quietly at her table, pushing her food around her plate more than eating it. Her appetite had been replaced by a cold sense of anticipation. Something deep inside told her that the night wasn't over. Not yet. At the front of the hall, the band slowed its tempo as Uncle Rashid Malik, the patriarch of the family, rose to his feet. The crowd hushed instantly. The years hadn't softened him. His hair was now streaked with gray, but his sharp eyes still carried that air of command. He held a microphone and smiled broadly at the audience. "Family," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight we celebrate not only 50 years of marriage between my beloved wife and me, but 50 years of legacy, loyalty, and success." Polite applause rippled through the room. Rashid continued. "The Malik name has stood for excellence, and though we've had our challenges, we've remained strong thanks to the people who never gave up on us." Aisha felt her chest tighten. People who never gave up on us? She nearly laughed. He had given up on everyone but himself long ago. He raised a glass. "However," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "this year was different. As many of you know, our company faced difficult times. For months, we were on the brink of collapse. But by the grace of God and with the help of a certain generous partner, we survived. In fact, we are thriving again." Murmurs of surprise ran through the crowd. The guests leaned in, whispering excitedly. Aisha froze. She knew this was it, the moment that would change everything. Rashid smiled proudly. "Tonight, I want to take a moment to thank the one person whose support saved the Malik Corporation from bankruptcy. The one person whose investment, vision, and faith revived our legacy." Sana, seated near the stage, straightened in excitement. "It must be Mr. Aslam from the investor group," she whispered to a cousin. "He's rich and foreign, of course he'd be their savior." Rashid extended a hand toward the audience, his voice booming. "Please join me in welcoming." He paused, glancing down at the card in his hand, "Ms. Aisha Malik." The room fell utterly silent. For a long second, the words didn't register. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The only sound was the faint clink of a dropped fork hitting the marble floor. Sana's smile froze on her face. Wait, what? She whispered, blinking rapidly. Rashid cleared his throat, forcing a strained smile. Yes, Esha Malik, my niece. Dozens of eyes swung toward her table. The same people who had mocked her moments ago now looked stunned, confused, even uncomfortable. Aisha could feel every gaze like a spotlight on her back. Her heart pounded, but her expression stayed calm. The waiter beside her whispered, Miss, I think he means you. She rose slowly, smoothing her shawl, and walked toward the stage. Every step echoed through the silence. The same hall where laughter had followed her entrance now felt like a courtroom awaiting judgment. Rashid's expression was a strained mask of politeness. Aisha, my dear, he said into the microphone, his tone trembling slightly, it seems we owe you a great deal of thanks. Aisha took the microphone from him gently. Not oh, uncle, she said softly but clearly. You already do. A ripple ran through the guests. She turned to face the crowd rows of familiar faces twisted in disbelief. She continued, Yes, it's true. The investment that saved the Malik Corporation came from my company. You didn't know my name because I preferred it that way. Until tonight. Gasps spread like wildfire. Sana's jaw dropped. Rashid's hand tightened on the microphone stand. Aisha smiled faintly, her voice steady and sure. I suppose you could say this celebration is partly mine. The chandeliers glittered above her like silent witnesses. For the first time that evening, the laughter had vanished, and Aisha, once the beggar at the table, now stood as the most powerful person in the room for a few long seconds. The only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Even the music had stopped. As though the instruments themselves were holding their breath, Aisha stood at the center of the stage, her mother's old shawl draped over her shoulders, its soft gold embroidery catching the light. She looked calm, serene even, but inside her heart raced. Still, she didn't waver. Not tonight, I know, she began, her voice steady but gentle, that many of you are surprised to see me here. Some of you may even be wondering how the poor cousin, could have done something like this. Her tone was polite, but every word landed with quiet force. She turned toward her uncle, who stood beside her with a fixed, uneasy smile. Uncle Rashid, I learned that the Malik Corporation was drowning in debt. I also learned that your board had rejected multiple offers for help until one came from a small firm named AM Holdings. Gasps filled the room as murmurs spread through the crowd. Several guests recognized the name. The mysterious company had recently made headlines for several strategic business rescues. Yes, Aisha continued, AM Holdings is my company. The stands for Aisha, for Malik, the name I was taught to be ashamed of became the foundation of everything I built. She paused, scanning the faces before her, faces that once turned away when she needed help, faces that whispered behind her back. Now they couldn't even meet her eyes. For years, she said softly, I worked quietly. I studied, I saved, and I remembered everything my father taught me about integrity, about patience, about dignity. He believed in this family, even when this family didn't believe in him. A hushed stillness fell over the room. My father, she continued, built the Malik Corporation from nothing. But when he died, his name was erased from the company records. My mother and I were left with nothing, not even a single share. I was told that business was business. Her eyes flickered toward Rashid. His jaw tightened, his face pale. But business, Aisha said, should never come at the cost of blood or honor. So I did what I had to. I built something of my own. And when the Malik Corporation started to crumble under its own greed, I saw my chance not for revenge, but for restoration. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folder. Slowly, she opened it and held up a document. This, she said, is the share transfer agreement, signed and sealed 2 months ago. AM Holdings now owns 62% of Malik Corporation. In simple terms, she smiled faintly, the company belongs to me. A loud gasp echoed through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. Sana's face turned ghostly white, her earlier arrogance evaporating. Rashid tried to speak, his voice trembling. Aisha, this must be a misunderstanding. We were told. Aisha turned to him, her tone calm but firm. You were told what you wanted to hear. My representatives never revealed my name. I wanted you to accept the deal based on merit, not pity. The crowd murmured again, admiration this time, mixed with awe. Aisha looked out over the sea of stunned faces. You see, I didn't come here tonight to humiliate anyone. I came because this family taught me a lesson years ago that worth isn't measured by wealth or by clothes, but by what you do when no one believes in you. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. I came here dressed the same way I left this family years ago, not to show poverty, but to remind you that dignity cannot be bought. For a moment there was silence, then soft clapping began. It started with the maid standing near the back of the hall, the same woman who had once worked for Aisha's mother. Then another guest joined in, then another, until the applause filled the room like a wave. Aisha smiled through the rising sound. The same hall that had echoed with laughter at her expense now thundered with respect, and though Rashid stood frozen beside her, his face a mix of shock and regret, Aisha felt no anger, only peace. Her father's dream had finally come full circle. The applause that followed Aisha's words echoed like thunder in the grand hall. It rolled through the crowd, hesitantly at first, then growing louder until even those who had mocked her earlier found themselves clapping. Unsure if they were celebrating her success or hiding their guilt, Aisha stood quietly amid it all, her expression calm, almost detached. She wasn't basking in their applause. She was listening to the sound of shame disguised as admiration. Her uncle Rashid's smile had long since vanished. The man who had spent decades towering over everyone now looked small, almost frail beneath the golden chandeliers. His hand gripped the edge of the table beside him, knuckles white. When the applause died down, he cleared his throat. Aisha, he began stiffly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You must understand, we didn't know. We thought... She turned toward him gently. You thought I was beneath you? Rashid flinched, the truth landing heavier than any accusation could. Sana, standing a few steps behind her father, looked utterly shattered. The color had drained from her face, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. You can't be serious, she stammered. You own us? Aisha's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. No, Sana, I don't own anyone. But I do control the company that bears our family name. And yes, that includes your father's position. A sharp murmur rippled through the crowd. People leaned closer, hungry for every word. Sana's eyes filled with tears not of remorse, but humiliation. This can't be happening, she whispered. You're lying. Asia's lips curved slightly, not in triumph, but in sadness. If it's a lie, you can check the records. The documents are public. But I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came to remind this family what it once stood for. Her words hung in the air, heavy and solemn, across the room. One of the older relatives, a man who had once voted to remove Aisha's father from the company, stood and bowed his head slightly. Your father would be proud of you, Aisha, he said quietly. He was a good man. We were wrong. Aisha nodded graciously. Thank you, Uncle Iqbal. That means more than you know. Others began murmuring apologies, awkward but sincere. Some approached her, offering congratulations, while others avoided her eyes entirely. Unwilling to confront the guilt her presence awakened. Rashid, however, remained frozen. Do you intend to remove me? He asked finally, his voice brittle. Aisha looked at him for a long moment before replying. I don't intend to take from you what you took from my father. I don't seek revenge, Uncle, but I will not let history repeat itself. The company will run with transparency, fairness, and decency from this day forward. Her words were simple, but they struck deep. Rashid's shoulders sagged, his pride deflating like a balloon pricked by reality. He tried to smile, weakly. You're your father's daughter. Yes, Aisha said softly. And that's something I'll never be ashamed of. In the corner, the maid who had spoken to Aisha earlier wiped a tear from her eye. Just like your mother, she whispered. Sana, meanwhile, turned and fled the hall, unable to face the eyes of those who had laughed with her earlier. The echo of her heels faded down the marble corridor, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Aisha stood at the center of it all, no longer the poor, unwanted girl they had mocked, but a woman who had reclaimed her family's legacy with grace instead of vengeance. She turned back to the guests and smiled. "Now, please," she said softly, "let's continue the celebration. After all, this night was meant to honor 50 years of family and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning." The crowd erupted again, this time not in forced applause, but genuine respect, and as Rashid sank slowly into his chair, eyes glassy with unspoken regret, Aisha realized something profound: forgiveness, not victory, was her final triumph. The music resumed softly, hesitant at first, like it was unsure whether joy still belonged in the room. Guests whispered to each other in awe and disbelief, their earlier arrogance replaced with nervous smiles. The air, once thick with mockery, now carried a strange reverence. Aisha stood at the center of the hall, her shawl still wrapped loosely around her shoulders, its faded gold thread shimmering under the chandeliers. She took a slow breath and reached for the microphone again. "Please," she said gently, her voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "Sit down. I have one more thing to say." The chatter faded instantly. Dozens of eyes, some guilty, some curious, focused on her. Even the servers paused in their steps, trays of crystal glasses balanced mid-air. Aisha smiled faintly. Tonight is supposed to be a celebration of love, of endurance, of family. And it still is. But I'd like to remind everyone here that family isn't measured by bloodlines or bank accounts. It's measured by loyalty, kindness, and how we treat one another when no one's watching. The words struck deep. Many lowered their eyes, unable to meet her gaze. She continued, "I came here tonight wearing old clothes because they remind me of who I am, of where I came from. My father used to say that integrity is like a thread in cloth. You can wear the richest silk, but if that thread breaks, everything falls apart." I suppose he was right. The maid at the back smiled softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. Aisha's gaze turned toward her uncle. "Uncle Rashid," she said kindly, "you taught me something too, though you may not realize it. You taught me that sometimes pain is a better teacher than comfort. Without the hardships I faced, I might never have found my own strength." Rashid looked up at her, eyes glistening with unspoken remorse. For the first time in his life, he seemed at a loss for words. "I don't want this company or this family to be divided anymore," Aisha said. "I don't want bitterness or old wounds to define us. We've spent too long chasing pride and forgetting compassion." She turned toward the audience. "So let's do something different tonight. Let's make this celebration about gratitude, not status. About forgiveness, not appearance. Because wealth fades, but dignity endures." There was a stillness in the air, followed by soft, genuine applause. It wasn't the forced kind from earlier. It was quiet, respectful, heartfelt. Someone in the crowd called out, "You're more like your father than anyone here." Aisha smiled. "I hope so," she said. "He believed in second chances, and I think this family deserves one." Then, with a calm grace, she handed the microphone back to Rashid. He hesitated, staring at it for a long moment before finally taking it. His voice cracked slightly before he steadied himself. "I was wrong. I was proud, blind, and foolish. Kemal, your father, deserved better. And so did you, Aisha." The hall fell silent again, but this time it was heavy with emotion. Not tension. Rashid continued, "If there's any redemption for me, it's that I see in you what this family lost: humility. I can't change the past, but I can promise this. From now on, the Malik name will stand for honor again. That's my word." Aisha nodded, her eyes warm with quiet forgiveness. "That's all I ever wanted." A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Glasses were raised once more, but this time the toast wasn't hollow. When they drank, it wasn't for show, it was for reconciliation. As the music swelled again, laughter returned, softer, genuine this time. People began to dance, talk, and smile without pretense. Aisha stepped off the stage and slipped toward the back of the hall, away from the glitter and noise. She looked around at the place where she had once been humiliated and saw it now transformed not by lights or money, but by truth. And for the first time that night, She truly felt like she belonged, not as the poor relative, not as the savior, but as the woman who had turned mockery into meaning. The celebration, at last, was hers. The night grew softer as the celebration continued. The once bright chandeliers dimmed to a golden hue, casting gentle light over the hall, now filled with laughter not sharp or mocking this time, but warm and human. The scent of roses and cardamom tea drifted through the air. Somewhere, a violin played a mellow tune that seemed to wash away the bitterness of the evening. Aisha stepped outside for a moment of silence. The garden was cool under the moonlight, the marble steps glistening faintly with dew. She could still hear faint music from inside, but out here, it felt like the world had exhaled for the first time in years. She could breathe easily. She sat down on the stone bench near the fountain, the same fountain where, years ago, she had once overheard her relatives mock her father's financial troubles. The memory no longer hurt, it had become distant, like a scar that no longer ached when touched got, as the wind stirred the jasmine vines. Aisha thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the stares, the laughter, how they had all been necessary in some strange way. If she hadn't endured that cruelty, she might never have built the strength she carried tonight. Her father's words came back to her, quiet and steady in her mind. People will always see what you wear before they see who you are. But if your character shines bright enough, even the blind will recognize your worth. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't born of sadness. They were of release. She whispered softly into the night, "You were right, Baba, always." Behind her, soft footsteps approached. It was Mrs. Nema, the old maid who had worked for the family for decades. Her kind face was lined with age and wisdom. She held 2 cups of tea and handed one to Aisha. "You handled them like a queen," Naima said with a proud smile. "Your mother would have clapped her hands from the heavens." Aisha chuckled softly. "I didn't want to humiliate anyone, Naima. I just wanted them to remember what matters." "And they will," Naima replied, sitting beside her. "They'll remember this night long after the gold fades from their walls." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping tea. The moonlight shimmered on the surface of the fountain, breaking into silver ripples. Naima looked at her. "So what will you do now? You've got the company, the respect, the name." Aisha smiled thoughtfully. "I'll rebuild it, but differently. I wanted to help people like us, the ones who were ignored or belittled. Maybe fund scholarships for the workers' children, or open a program for widows who can't find jobs. My father believed wealth meant nothing if it didn't lift others." Naima nodded approvingly. "Then you'll build something greater than money, a legacy." Aisha's smile deepened. "That's the plan." The 2 women sat quietly again, letting the cool night wash over them. From the hall came the faint sound of applause, perhaps another toast. Perhaps laughter from a corner of reconciliation. Aisha didn't need to be there to know how the evening would unfold. She could already picture her uncle offering quiet apologies, her cousins avoiding her gaze but slowly softening. Realizing that she hadn't come to conquer, only to remind God as she rose to leave, Aisha turned for one last look at the glowing mansion behind her. For years that building had represented rejection. Tonight it stood as proof of transformation, not just hers, but everyone's. She whispered again, almost to herself. "You can't control how people see you, but you can control how you rise from it." Then she walked down the marble path. The faint light of dawn just touching the horizon dot behind her. Laughter rang out from the hall. Ahead of her, a new beginning waited, quiet, humble, and full of promise. A soft orange light broke across the horizon as Aisha's car rolled down the quiet road, leaving the mansion behind. The once intimidating estate now looked smaller, gentler under the pale morning sky. The echoes of last night's laughter, confessions, forgiveness still lingered in her heart, but they no longer weighed her down. They lifted her. She rolled down the window, letting the cool morning breeze touch her face. It felt like a blessing, a clean slate. The scent of earth after the night's dew mingled with faint notes of jasmine from the garden she had just left. For the first time in years, Aisha didn't feel like she was running from the past. She was walking toward her future. As the city came into view, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her uncle Rashid. Thank you for your grace last night. You gave me back my conscience. Aisha smiled gently, her eyes misting over. Forgiveness, she realized, was more powerful than vengeance. It didn't just free the guilty. It freed the wounded too. By the time she reached her modest home, a quiet place with white curtains and flowering plants by the gate, the sun had risen fully. She stepped out of the car and paused, feeling the warmth on her skin. Everything looked brighter. Her assistant, Farhan, greeted her at the door with a cheerful grin. You made the news, ma'am. They're calling you the hidden heir of the Malik Empire. Aisha laughed softly. They can call me whatever they like, as long as they understand what the name stands for now. She walked into her home office where a folder lay open on her desk. Inside were plans for a new foundation, the Kamal Trust, named after her father. Its mission was simple: to support education and dignity for every working-class family who had once been overlooked. Aisha ran her fingers over the blueprint, imagining the school, the scholarships, the changed lives. This was what her father's dream had always meant. Not power, not control, but compassion given structure. Later that afternoon, she received a call from one of the factory managers, a man who had once served under her father. Madam, he said, voice thick with emotion, we heard what happened last night. The workers are with you. Whatever you decide, we'll follow your lead. Aisha's eyes softened. Tell them this. No one's following anyone. We're building together. After hanging up, she looked out her window at the busy streets below. Children were walking to school. Vendors were setting up their carts. Life was moving, honest, raw, unpolished life. And for the first time, she saw beauty in its simplicity. In the weeks that followed, the story of the celebration spread like wildfire. People admired her not for her wealth, but for her humility. The same relatives who once mocked her began to visit, not out of guilt, but out of a genuine desire to reconnect. Rashid stepped down from his executive role but continued to work with her as an advisor, slowly regaining the family's respect through honesty. Sana, once too proud to speak, began volunteering at the foundation. It was awkward at first, but Aisha welcomed her with open arms. Healing, she knew, took time. Months later, at the opening ceremony of the Kamal Trust, Aisha stood before a modest crowd. The hall wasn't grand, no chandeliers, no marble floors, but the air was filled with joy. Children laughed, workers clapped, and portraits of her late parents hung proudly on the wall behind her. She took the microphone, her voice calm and steady. Wealth can build walls, she said, but love builds bridges. My father taught me that the truest kind of success isn't measured in numbers, it's measured in the lives we touch. The audience erupted in applause, their faces shining with pride and gratitude. As she stepped off the stage, Nema caught her hand and whispered, You did it, child. You turned mockery into meaning. Aisha smiled through tears. No, Naima, we did. Outside, the wind stirred again, carrying petals from the trees across the courtyard. And as Aisha stood there between her past and her future, she felt an unshakable peace settle. Inside her, the world that once laughed at her old clothes now bowed. To the richness of her spirit, her story had come full circle. And this time, the celebration truly was hers.